My mother is the highest level of a failed parent. When I was 2 years old, my baby brother Daniel was born. As a typical 2-year-old, I didn't like that and proceeded to act out in regards to it. As time went on, though, I learned from my grandfather and grandmother that treating someone like that wasn't a good idea, and then turned my act around to love and care for him, helping out where I could. However, this didn't change much. My mother basically threw me away to be raised by my grandparents, because I was, in her words, a demonic hellspawn of a child. In her mind, her new child was the latest and greatest, and I was just old news. This was the beginning of a pattern that would define my entire childhood and ultimately lead to the revenge I would spend nearly 2 decades planning and executing. My grandparents became my real parents, the ones who taught me right from wrong, who showed me love and stability. Let me skip forward in time. My mother had now had her 4 kids, Daniel and I with my dad, and Thomas and Emma with my stepfather. I was about 13, Daniel was 11, Emma was about 1.5, and Thomas had just been born. Mom and Dad were divorced by this point, and Mom had married my stepfather. I was at that rebellious age where things didn't make sense to me, and I felt like I knew everything. My stepfather's idea to handle this was to beat it out of me. Every time I showed any sense of individuality or questioned something, I got beaten for it. Sometimes right in front of my mother, and she didn't care one bit. This was where the trigger for me wanting my revenge started. Being 13, and sadly, a little mentally damaged from all of the beatings, and having a bookcase full of books land on me at around age 11, I had no concept of what sort of revenge would come from my mind at the time. So I decided that waiting would be best. On top of that, my mother and stepfather refused to do any housework. Instead, they waited for the weekend when Grandma and Grandpa would leave to visit Grandma's mother, and put us to work cleaning the house and doing stuff adults should be doing. Now I understood the concept of chores. Chores were fine. It was when you made your child climb ladders and get on the roof at the age of 11 to clean out gutters, or climb trees to snip branches that it got too dangerous. This had been happening since I was about 10 years old. My mother's neglect wasn't just emotional, it was putting us in physical danger on a regular basis. But I learned to be careful, to survive, to document everything in my mind for later. I was building a case against her, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. Every moment of neglect, every dangerous task, every beating from my stepfather that she ignored, it all went into my mental file. Time skipped to when I was 14. My mother told Daniel and me to watch Emma, who was 2 by this time. My stepfather wanted to play video games, and when we weren't being bad in his eyes, he'd let us watch, but we were never allowed to play without him there watching us. I suddenly looked up while sitting there and asked, "Where is Emma?" Full-blown panic mode initiated. Daniel and I just got up and started scouring through the house. My stepfather went to check my mom's room where she was sleeping with Thomas, who she'd been up with all night. My dad was in the kitchen, making himself something to eat while visiting, then freaked out and burned his hand on the stovetop when everyone started panicking. He started searching too. Daniel and I ran out back and looked around, saw nothing. We didn't even think to check the pool, so we ran back inside and rummaged through the garage. Next thing we heard was my mother screaming at the top of her lungs. We rushed outside to find Emma on the deck, not breathing, and my mother and stepfather trying to perform CPR on her. My father dragged Daniel and me away to go inside, and the ambulance was called. Needless to say, Emma did not survive, and they pulled the plug on her that night. Daniel and I were devastated. Being the teenager I was and the preteen he was, we immediately blamed ourselves. Our grandparents assured us that it wasn't our fault or responsibility, that we needed to know this wasn't on us. But guilt is a powerful thing, and it ate at us both. A week later, Child Protective Services got word and came to investigate. My father, in his infinite wisdom, initiated a custody battle with my mother after this, claiming she wasn't capable of caring for her children. He won, temporarily. Needless to say, our grandparents believed we belonged with our mother and fought back. My mom ultimately won us back. I couldn't believe it. Time skipped forward. I was 18 now, an adult, looking to graduate high school and make my mark on the world and get my life going. Daniel was 15 now and had gotten into a fight and broken his finger. It had to be repaired with pins and screws, and he was on some pretty hefty pain medicine. I don't remember the exact name. It was my mother's job to watch him and regulate his pain medicine so nothing bad would happen. Sadly, that bad thing did happen. My grandfather picked me up from school one day, and I could see he had a gloomy look on his face. We showed up to the house, and as we were walking up, I could see the paramedics rolling a stretcher with a body bag on it. My heart stopped. Daniel had died from a drug overdose at the age of 15 because my mother wasn't watching him like she should have been. That was the final straw for me. Something inside me broke permanently that day. At that moment, my family was divided. My dad's side and my mother's side. My mother had my grandparents, who I was living with at the time, and my father had me and his family. I sided with my father completely, his argument being that, had she been a better mother, Daniel would still be alive. What's worse, Thomas had been taken away by CPS and put in foster care. My mother was never allowed to raise children again, and I never saw my half-brother ever again. I was now effectively an only child. My mother had destroyed the life I knew with her neglect, so I was going to ruin the rest of her life any way I could. This woman had caused the deaths of 2 of my siblings, and I never got to see my living half-sibling again. She'd abused me, mentally, emotionally, physically, taken away my childhood, and every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but seethe with unmitigated rage. Revenge time had officially begun. My grandfather had basically been my best friend. He took me in, cared for me, taught me all sorts of different skills. He had one flaw, though. He was too kind for his own good. Something my mother maliciously preyed on after the deaths in the family. My grandmother gave up hope and just diverted to his opinion on everything. So I made it a point that every time she tried to manipulate them, I challenged her on it in front of them. I made sure she had to fight for what she wanted. I always lost these arguments, but I could see my constant meddling would get to her, irritate her. I wanted her to do something. I wanted her to hit me, harm me, give me a single reason to call the authorities on her. She never went that far, but she did break down, crying multiple times. Then I got lucky. She slipped at work, herniated a few of her discs, and messed her back up really badly. When I got the news, I grinned. My first opportunity had arrived. Around this time, my stepfather had been imprisoned for doctor shopping, and my mother wanted a divorce from him. When she came home from the hospital, I would take her medications and hide them around the house, and sometimes even throw them away. I wanted her to be in agony. I wanted her to suffer as much as possible, and she did. Every morning I'd watch her struggle to get up, searching desperately for her pain pills. The look of confusion and panic on her face when she couldn't find them was intoxicating. A few months later, she got into a car wreck and the police found out she was on a hefty amount of her pain medications. She was charged with a DUI and put in jail for 6 months. I grinned and laughed once I got that news and proceeded to plan my next stage. She was in pain and behind bars. This was perfect. The revenge was just beginning, and I was only getting started. Time skip again, after she got out of jail. We'll skip ahead a few years. She was now living with us again. I was officially in college. I'd done the stupid thing and taken a year off between high school graduation and applying to a college, so my grandparents made me a deal. As long as I worked and was in school, I could stay with them free of charge. Who wouldn't take that deal? While my mother was in jail, I made it a point to shove all of her property into storage and made her room my room. I turned my old living space into my gaming room. She had no choice but to sleep on the couch. I enjoyed every moment of her agony when she would get up from laying on the couch. The agony was caused by the metal bars on it, pressing into her damaged back as she slept. This was my revenge for some time. Slow and painful, watching her suffer daily. We moved back to the old house we were all living in previously, and my mother had made her back worse through a series of mistakes and bad decisions. She had somehow convinced my grandparents to start illegally procuring drugs for her. She would make the connection with the dealer and they would shell out money to her for them. I argued with my grandparents to stop. It was illegal, and it would land them all in jail if they got caught. My grandfather agreed with me, but my grandmother couldn't help but take care of her little girl, and guilted my grandfather into it. I refused to be a part of it. I put in an anonymous tip to local law enforcement, but sadly nothing came of it. My revenge had failed this time. But I didn't know I would get the ultimate victory later. Plus, I was still messing with her by hiding her medications. It was childish, but sometimes you had to be a bit childish to get the point across. Years continued to pass, and I watched my mother deteriorate. Not just physically from her back problems and drug issues, but mentally and emotionally as well. She became increasingly desperate, increasingly pathetic. She had no job, no prospects, no friends. Everyone who had once been in her life had abandoned her, and for good reason. She'd burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship. My grandparents were the only ones who still tolerated her presence, and even they were growing tired of her constant demands and manipulation. I continued my education, worked hard, saved money, and built a life for myself. All while she spiraled downward. Every success I had was another knife in her heart. Every time I accomplished something, I made sure she knew about it. I graduated college. I got a good job. I started dating a wonderful woman. All things she'd never have because of her own terrible choices and the consequences of her neglect. The years turned into a decade. I was in my late 20s now, and my plan was reaching its final stages. I'd been saving money aggressively. From the jobs I worked, from inheritance, from other deaths in the family, from careful investments. I had a substantial amount put away, money that would allow me to make my final move when the time was right. My grandfather's health was declining, and I knew that when he passed, everything would change. He was the only thing keeping my grandmother from completely giving in to my mother's manipulation. He was the voice of reason, the one who sometimes stood up to her when she went too far. Without him, my mother would try to take complete control. But I had plans to prevent that. I was going to make sure that when the time came, my mother would be left with absolutely nothing. No safety net, no family, no future. Just the consequences of her actions staring her in the face. My grandfather passed away last year. It was devastating for me personally. He'd been more of a father to me than my own dad ever was. But I had to stay focused on my mission. I'd been planning this for so long that I couldn't let grief derail me now. After the funeral, I started helping my grandmother with the arrangements. She was not in great shape, emotionally or physically. About 6 months after my grandfather died, her dog passed away too. That was the final blow to her spirit. She'd lost her husband and her beloved pet in the span of half a year. She started talking about moving into a retirement home. She couldn't maintain the house anymore, couldn't take care of herself properly. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I immediately offered to help her with the transition, to make sure she got into a good facility, to handle all the logistics, and most importantly, to make sure my mother didn't interfere with the plans. I was 31 now. It had been 13 agonizing years since my brother Daniel died, and I was finally ready to complete my revenge on my mother. I'd saved a substantial amount of cash over the years, from jobs, inheritance, and careful financial planning. I went to visit my grandmother, who wasn't in great shape since my grandfather passed and her dog had died. We were sitting there talking about the retirement home, about her plans, about what would happen to the house. That's when my mother came out and approached us. She looked older than her years, worn down by addiction and poor choices. She asked if I would take care of her after Grandma was gone. She said it was my duty as her son. She was broke. My grandmother was going into a retirement home, and my mother had blown through her inheritance with her drug dealings. The rest was going to me. I knew it for a fact. This was my moment. The moment I'd been waiting 18 years for. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I stared my mother directly in the eyes. I managed the most hateful, vicious stare I could muster, and it wasn't hard. Then I spoke the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for years. You get nothing from me. Grandma's going into a retirement home. I'm moving states. You destroyed my life, took away my childhood, were responsible for the deaths of my siblings, broke the law numerous times, and you made everyone's lives a living hell. You will be on the street and die alone, and I will laugh. I paused, letting that sink in. I never loved you, and I never will. You will never see your grandchildren, if and when there are any. You will not be at my wedding. You will never be a mother to me again. Rot in hell. My grandmother's jaw hit the floor. My mother burst into tears. I had finally broken her. I'd gotten my revenge. It may not seem like much to some people, but that moment was heavenly for me. The look on my mother's face was everything I'd imagined it would be, and more. Complete devastation. Total despair. The realization that she had nothing and no one, and that it was entirely her own fault. She tried to speak, to defend herself, to beg, but no words came out. Just sobs. My grandmother looked between us, shocked at the venom in my words, but unable to argue with the truth of them. Everything I'd said was factual. My mother had been responsible for 2 deaths through neglect. She had made my childhood a living hell. She had broken the law repeatedly. She had destroyed our family. And now she was going to face the consequences without any safety net. I felt no guilt, no remorse, only satisfaction. Pure, undiluted satisfaction. I'd waited so long for this moment, planned so carefully, and it had gone exactly as I'd hoped. She was broken, defeated, and I was walking away to start my new life without her shadow hanging over me. My grandmother is going into that retirement home in about 3 months, and I'm helping her move her stuff. I'm making sure there will be no chance of my mother weaseling her way out of her fate. I'm handling all the paperwork, all the finances, everything. My mother has no access to any of it. She can't manipulate my grandmother anymore, because I'm there as a buffer, as a guardian. After my grandmother is settled in the retirement home, I'm moving to a new state and starting my new life with a new job and my wonderful girlfriend who I love more than anything. We've already picked out the state, found job opportunities, started looking at places to live. It's all coming together perfectly. My mother will be left behind, homeless, with no one to turn to. Every bridge she could have crossed has been burned. Every person who might have helped her has been driven away by her own actions. She'll be alone, in pain, struggling to survive, and I'll be thriving in my new life, finally free of her. For those of you who have brothers and sisters, love them, cherish them, and be with them, because you never know what's going to happen. This revenge was born of me losing my siblings, the one thing I loved most in this world. Being an older brother was the happiest time in my life, and after Emma died and Daniel died and Thomas was taken by CPS, I have had to suffer as an only child. I still cry myself to sleep at night over it sometimes. It's traumatizing. So please, cherish your siblings. I think about what life could have been like if my mother had been different, if she'd actually cared for us, protected us, been a real parent. Emma would be in her 20s now, probably in college or starting a career. Daniel would be 28, maybe married, maybe with kids of my own to be an uncle to. Thomas would be in his late 20s, and I might actually know him. But that's not reality. Reality is that my mother's neglect stole all of that from me. My dad got married again after losing his second wife, not my mother, and had a son with his third wife. They got divorced, and he found out the third wife had a drug problem. Dad won custody and raised him, then got married to his fourth wife, who he's happily living with now. I see them from time to time, but not enough to have an effect on my half-brother's life. I get to see him rarely, with him being in school most of the time and me at work, not to mention my dad being busy with his own life. We're aware each other exists, but my half-brother and I have never been together in one place long enough to really get to know each other. It's another thing my mother's actions cost me, a relationship with another sibling. Another connection that could have been meaningful but was destroyed before it could ever really form. Sometimes I wonder if he knows the full story of what happened to Emma and Daniel. Probably not. My dad likely shielded him from it. Looking back now, I can see the full arc of my revenge. It started when I was 13, when I first realized my mother was fundamentally broken as a parent. It intensified at 14 when Emma died in the pool. It became an obsession at 18 when Daniel overdosed. And it culminated at 31 when I finally told her exactly what I thought of her and condemned her to a life alone. 18 years of planning, of small acts of sabotage, of positioning pieces on the chessboard, hiding her medications, getting her arrested for the DUI, taking over her room, blocking her attempts to manipulate my grandparents, reporting her illegal drug activity. Every action was calculated to make her life worse, to ensure she suffered consequences for what she'd done. Some people might think I went too far. Some might say I should have forgiven her, moved on, let karma handle it. But those people didn't lose their siblings to her negligence. They didn't grow up being beaten while she watched. They don't carry the scars I carry. The hiding of her medications was probably the pettiest part of my revenge, but it was also the most consistently satisfying. Week after week, month after month, watching her search frantically for pills that I'd hidden or thrown away, watching her pain increase, watching her desperation grow. Some might call it cruel. I call it justice. She'd caused me and my siblings so much pain through her neglect and her choices. Why shouldn't she experience pain in return? The DUI that sent her to jail, that was partially my doing too. I knew she was taking too many pain pills. I knew she was impaired, and I made sure she had reasons to go out when she was most impaired. Accidentally mentioning that the store was having a sale on something she wanted, timing it for when I knew she'd taken her medication. I didn't force her to drive. That was her choice. But I created the circumstances that made it more likely, and it worked perfectly. Taking over her room while she was in jail was perhaps my favorite act of petty revenge. She came home from 6 months in jail to find all her belongings in storage, and me firmly established in what had been her space. She had no choice but to accept sleeping on the couch with its metal bars that pressed into her injured back every night. I could have let her have the room back. My grandparents probably would have supported it. But I refused. I'd claimed that space, and I wasn't giving it up. Every morning I'd wake up in a comfortable bed and go out to see her struggling to get up from the couch, her face twisted in pain. And I'd smile. Some mornings I'd make myself breakfast and eat it in front of her, not offering her anything. Small cruelties perhaps, but each one was a tiny piece of justice for what she'd done. Each one was a reminder that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy people's lives without eventually facing repercussions. The anonymous tip to law enforcement about her drug dealing was disappointing when it didn't result in an arrest. But it still served a purpose. It put her on their radar. It created a record of suspicion. And it made her paranoid, wondering who had reported her, which of her few remaining contacts had betrayed her. She never suspected it was me. She thought I was too focused on school and work to pay attention to what she was doing. She underestimated me, just as she'd underestimated the damage her neglect would cause. Just as she'd underestimated how much I'd remember, how much I'd plan, how patient I could be in executing my revenge. 18 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Most people would have let it go, moved on, focused on building their own life rather than tearing down someone else's. But I'm not most people. I couldn't move on. Not while she was still living consequence-free off my grandparents' charity. Not while she still had a safety net. Not until I'd made sure she'd lost everything. Now, as I prepare to move to a new state with my girlfriend, I feel a sense of completion I haven't felt since I was a child. The weight of rage and grief that I've carried for 18 years is finally lifting. Not completely. I'll always mourn Emma and Daniel. I'll always regret that I never got to know Thomas. But the burning need for revenge is satisfied. My mother will spend whatever years she has left alone, struggling, suffering the consequences of her choices. No grandchildren to spoil, no son to care for her in her old age, no family to support her, nothing but her own company and her memories of the children she failed. And me? I'll be building the life I should have had all along. A life with people who love and support me. A life free from abuse and neglect. A life where I can finally heal from the trauma of my childhood. Sometimes people ask if revenge is worth it. If holding on to anger and hurt for so long damages you more than it damages the target. In my case, I'd say yes, it was worth it. Because my revenge wasn't just about hurting her. It was about ensuring justice, about making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else, and about reclaiming my own power and agency after a childhood where I had none. I spent 18 years destroying her life piece by piece. And I'd do it all again.